right, awesome. So let's kick it off. So really excited to discuss our bounty capabilities with you today and show a little bit of our platform. I'm Morgan Pearson from HackerOne's product marketing team. And before we begin, I'll just run through a few quick notes. Chris, if you want to just go to the next slide for me. Awesome. So a few quick notes. This session is live on LinkedIn and will be recorded. We'll provide an on-demand version to all registrants and attendees. You can submit your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom or LinkedIn, and feel free to share your comments or questions in the chat at any time. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it to Chris Campbell, one of our lead solution engineers here at HackerOne.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Hey folks, it's lovely to have you here today. My name is Chris Campbell. As Morgan said, I am one of the lead solution engineers at HackerOne. I'm based in London, UK, and you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from Glasgow, Scotland. So I look forward to a very engaging conversation today. I would encourage any questions, please pop them in the chat throughout the session. I'll try and answer them when we get a chance. There will also be a Q&A at the end of the call. Hopefully today I'll be able to show you some of the platform. We'll run through how to use Bug Bounty, and we'll do a bit of a deep dive into some existing Bug Bounty programs and how our customers are using those to effect. So let's get to it. Where does Bug Bounty fit in with regards to the overall SDLC management landscape? Now, a lot of our customers, when they come to me, they say, oh, I'd love to, let's buy a Bug Bounty and let's run a Bug Bounty. And absolutely, we want to work with you. But if you want to think about Bug Bounty in your mind, where it sits, it's very much the last layer of defense in the SDLC. So we're thinking about applications that are already built, that you've released, that are into continuous monitoring stage. So the way I see it, HackerOne, we started as a Bug Bounty platform and we built out lots of solutions. So you can see here in this, what I like to call the shared responsibility model, our customers very much still own the development and the automated testing part of SDLC vulnerability management. But after that, HackerOne can now help in multiple stages. So we have built out a code review offering. We launched that last year. It's a fantastic part of our service now. Code security auditing as well, where we can go through, manually your entire code base to try and find vulnerabilities in code where they exist. And of course, pen testing is one of our fastest growing areas of the business. Lastly is Bug Bounty. Now, last, but certainly not least, Bug Bounty is, of the services we discussed, the only service that is running continuously 365 days a year, every year, to help provide that extra level of coverage for your program. So how does this all fit in together? Well, HackerOne, I like to think of it as a gateway to a global community. We have over 2 million registered hackers who are signed up on our platform. And HackerOne provides a service whereby we have helped to grow this community. We help look after our hackers, but we connect them through our different solutions to organizations. Now, organizations might want to engage hackers through different processes. And so, for example, if you wanted to run a year-round Bug Bounty program, we're going to help set that up for you. Similarly, if you want to run a pen test, of course, that might be a more focused engagement, a point in time, limited time engagement only, in which case we'll set that up and do all the management on your behalf. Now, in the middle of all this sits the HackerOne platform, where we, of course, are processing payments, we are onboarding our hackers, we are going through the background vetting. So HackerOne very much is that broker in the global space between hackers and organizations who want to utilize their services. A little bit about us. So HackerOne launched over 10 years ago. We're now trusted by household names. I'm sure you recognize some of the different logos there. I speak to organizations across Europe and Asia every single day, and there's no end to the number of verticals in which we can help. So you can see we have classic retail there, e-commerce, insurance, finance, manufacturing, the list goes on. One thing I'm incredibly proud of is that HackerOne has paid out more bounties to the global hacking community than any other provider in the world. So to date, we've paid out over $350 million to our community, and that's across over 400,000 valid vulnerabilities which have been remediated. So the numbers do certainly speak for themselves. So why should you use bug bounty? What does it mean? Well, bear in mind, if you want to find these weird and wonderful errors that we as humans create, then we believe it does take a human to find those. And so hackers bring with them this incredible creativity and originality when it comes to their testing. Unlike a pen test, which is very much methodology defined and methodology driven, hackers have that mindset of thinking, what strange things can I do to break this software? Now, one of our hackers famously once said, hackers don't actually break anything, they just show you where the vulnerabilities lie. And I believe that's certainly true. So what we advocate for is if you can utilize the energy and the efforts of this community, it will certainly help to strengthen your own security programs across your applications and digital domain. Why does, we say this phrase, the world's largest ethical hacking community. Why does that matter? Why does that matter? If you want to think about this, I have customers all the time that say, well, won't this increase the risk profile of my assets? And I would always say to that, well, no, because this community already exists. We, of course, have the unethical community, but we have the ethical hacking community who've signed up to try and help organizations. And those people are already looking around the internet to try and find vulnerabilities in order to inform you responsibly. But if you don't have a means of communicating with that community, it can be difficult. Time and time again, we hear from customers who said, before I had a bug bounty program, I used to get emails to distribution lists. I used to get reached out on LinkedIn by a stranger. It was quite a difficult process. Because we have cultivated this community, we work with them on a daily basis. We'll act as that broker so you can have the ease of communication with a global community. Now, as a massive part of our service with Bug Bounty, we never want to just set up a program and leave you to it. We'll always provide a managed service. What that means, certainly in the first instance, is building the program, setting up the scope, arranging the rules of engagement, and I'm going to come on to that in a little moment. But one of the most important services our customers find is this world-class triage. Now, what that means, for every single vulnerability submitted on your bug bounty program, a HackerOne analyst will go through and perform that L1 triage on your behalf. Now, we have a team of analysts across the globe working across all time zones, and they work through a tremendous number of reports on your behalf. Our customers tell us that this helps them, it helps alleviate already stressed teams. We understand there's no such thing in the cybersecurity space as having too many members of your team. No one has ever had that problem. Everyone's stretched. And so utilizing that extra people power from an analyst team will help you get to the bottom of bugs faster and ultimately remediate bugs quicker. Okay, so we've set the scene. What is Bounty? We're working with a global community. HackerOne is acting as this broker between this community and your organization, and we can engage them in specific solution types. Today, we're going to look at Bug Bounty. What does that mean? Well, I have a live demo environment set up for you. So let's jump onto that now. So you should see in front of you, it says the HackerOne Bounty webinar. Now, I have used hackerone.com to create a demo environment. It's actually scraped our own website. And so what you'll see in front of you, this is the policy page. This is the security landing page of a bug bounty program, excuse me. Now, what we're saying here, this is the first thing that a hacker will see when they're invited to hack on a program. Now, in this demo environment, I want you to pretend like this is a private program. In the real world, of course, HackerOne has a public bug bounty program, which means we invite any hacker from across the world to submit a vulnerability report into that program. In this case, I'm setting up a private program, which means that it's invite only. What HackerOne advocates is that if you're working with bug bounty for the first time as an organization, we should always set up a private program. The reason being, it allows us to control the scale of the activity on your program. We don't want to overwhelm teams. We want them to have a workflow that's manageable. And so we don't want to flood you with vulnerability reports that ultimately you can't get to work on straight away. So we'll start 90% of the time with our customers, we'll start with a small focused program, which means, let's say we invite 50 or 100 hackers from our community. We'll match them with the requirements of your organization, and then we'll launch this program. So what have we done before inviting those hackers? You'll see here, the HackerOne program lays out the rules, rewards, and scope. So what that means, you can see here this reward table. The reward table is one of the most important things from a hacker's perspective. It says, based on the severity of a vulnerability I submit on your program, what is the dollar amount I stand to gain? And so these severity ratings are mapping to a CVSS score, and you can see up to $3,000 would be paid out for a valid critical vulnerability submitted to this program. Okay, so I'm a hacker, now I'm interested. I can see, wow, I can gain $3,000 for up to a critical vulnerability. That's super. What is HackerOne looking for? Now, HackerOne will always help organizations to create and tailor a policy wording that works for their requirements. We recognize that all organizations are slightly different. They're not looking for a uniform approach, and that's okay. So what's really important here is that we're directing the hacking community to use their efforts in a way that makes sense for your security goals. If I scroll down, what you'll see here is the program rules. In the program rules, we're saying to the community, this is how we want you to submit vulnerability reports. These are the types of vulnerabilities we want you to stay away from. In fact, in this demo environment, we go so far as to say, here are out-of-scope vulnerabilities. Now, a lot of these might make sense to some people on the call. You'll see here, for example, any activity that could lead to the disruption of our service, i.e. DOS or DDoS style testing, is explicitly prohibited from our program. And similarly, as well, you can see things like missing best practices, SSL, TLS configuration. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are already running automated services that are giving you these warnings all the time. And so my customers come to me and say, Chris, I really want to use bug bounty, but I don't want to catch low-hanging fruit. I want to use it to find impactful vulnerabilities. And that's okay. Let's put that clearly in the wording of the out-of-scope vulnerabilities for your program and make sure that the hackers have clear instructions as to how they should engage with your program. You'll notice here at the bottom of the program wording, we have a safe harbor statement. Now, safe harbor statements are extremely important because what we are saying to the hackers is we are allowing you to engage responsibly in the testing of our assets, but you must stick to the rules we have laid out here in this policy. And so this, if you want to think of it, creates a social contract between the hackers and your organization to say, let's work together. I look forward to getting your work, but you must stick with the rules. And if you do stick with the rules, you will never come under, you won't be pursued with any legal action. So, okay, we've talked about the scope of vulnerabilities and we've talked about some of the rules of engagement. Now, the other element of scope that really matters when we're setting up a program will be the scope of assets. So in this instance where we're setting up a private program, we would recommend, generally speaking, that organizations starting their journey in a bug bounty program, bear in mind this is still a private program, they include a handful of their critical assets. Now, personally speaking, as a cybersecurity professional, I would never advocate that you include applications or assets that haven't been pen tested in a bounty. We want to make sure that there's been at least a minimum level of coverage before including assets in a bug bounty. There's a lot of reasons for that, but not least of all, we want you to manage your spend properly. So of course, if you run through a HackerOne pen test on your core applications, you can then, once you've successfully remediated any bugs, include those assets into your bounty. Bear in mind, thinking back to that, where does bounty sit slide? We're at the very end of the SDLC. We've built our applications. They're in continual release, continual monitoring. That's where we want to focus our bounty on. Not in the pre-release applications that are unyet built. Those would certainly be more valuable to use a pen test on. So you can see here, what is this laying out? Well, I have different types of assets. You can see I've got iOS applications, I have APIs. Anything that can be connected to on the internet can be included in a bug bounty program scope. Now, we recognize that not all assets are as equally important to your organization, and therefore you can cap the severity of the vulnerability reports reported on that program. And for example, you could also explicitly select certain assets as being ineligible for bounty. Now, again, we would recommend this practice because we want you to be able to manage your bug bounty budget properly. And so if we start with a small number or a small subset of assets, as in when your team feels comfortable, we can build out this scope, we can include more assets, and we can have more and more hackers be invited to this program. Okay, so I'm a hacker. I've been invited to your organization's bug bounty program. What am I looking for? Well, every year we conduct research. We call it the HackerPowered Security Report, HPSR. You can check that out on our website. It's an incredible piece of work that our team put together every year. We poll thousands of hackers and we ask them, what are the reasons why you joined a program? And very importantly, what are the reasons you turned down a bug bounty program? So from that, we can glean some insights into the community and what actually drives them. The number one reason a hacker says yes to being invited to a bug bounty program, unsurprisingly, are competitive rewards. So I, as a hacker, want to spend my time working on a program that I stand to gain money from. And of course, you have to think of HackerOne like a marketplace. You are advertising your assets for the work from hackers, and so we still have to try and remain competitive. One of the most important things we found from carrying out our research is that actually response efficiency is extremely important when it comes to hackers deciding whether or not to engage in a bug bounty rewards program. The reason being, if your program is for some reason much slower than the average program for cooperating with hackers, for acknowledging their work, and for ultimately paying out those bounties, it will dissuade me from wanting to join your program. So what I want to see is I want to see high payouts. First and foremost, that will attract hacking talent, and we want to have the best hackers we can afford on our program. Next, we definitely want to make sure that we're working fast. And by the way, HackerOne, as I said earlier, is going to help you boost these response efficiency ratings with our triage team. And I'm going to come on to that in more detail in a moment. But the third most important thing that we learned from the HackerPowered Security Report is that we also want to see varied scope. That doesn't just mean I want to see multiple different web applications. I want to see different asset types. I want to see weird and all the sort of strange things going around in your program. You'll see some of the live bug bounty public programs out there. They'll have large scopes. They'll use wildcards, which means to say they are inserting a high-level domain and they accept vulnerability reports on any of their subservices under those high-level domains. So a large and varied scope is something that's going to attract a lot of hacking talent to your program. Okay, so we've set up a bug bounty program. We're ready to invite hackers. What happens next? Well, what I want to walk you through now is actually what the vulnerability submission process looks like. So on HackerOne Bug Bounty webinar, you'll see I can go to a submission form. Now, this submission form is hosted on HackerOne.com. You can also host the submission form on your own website. If you have a security contact us form, you can host this there. This will then link back to your hosted program on HackerOne. So you can have multiple different places in which to harness that traffic and those interactions from the community. So I'm a hacker. I've been testing on HackerOne.com. What do I want to report? Well, firstly, I want to select my asset of which I found the vulnerability. Let's say we found it on the iOS. Next, I want to select the weakness. Okay, so what have I actually found here? Let's say I found an XSS, a cross-site scripting. Okay. Next, I will select a vulnerability severity. Now, this is a really important part of the entire cooperation with hackers. Bear in mind the severity will determine the payout they ultimately receive. So the hacker will go through, they can either select manually, or they can select a CVSS calculator. What are the different environmental factors of this vulnerability? This will then spit out a severity rating, which of course will map to a payout. In this example, I'm going to select a high vulnerability. And most importantly of all, in a vulnerability submission, I'm going to include a proof of concept. So you can see here that HackerOne is guiding the hacker to create this clear and easy to read vulnerability report that will ultimately be actioned by your team. So in this instance, bear in mind I found a cross-site scripting vulnerability on, the iOS application. And here we want the hacker to lay out step by step exactly how they found the vulnerability. Ideally including any supporting evidence, whether that's code snippets, whether that's screenshots or screen recordings. They can include that in the vulnerability report, which will then be submitted to you. You'll see this box impact. This is extremely important because we want to, let's say you're an analyst at a large organization, you receive a vulnerability type you've never even heard of before. Why should this matter? Well, I can see it's CVSS high, so I've got an inkling it should probably be fixed pretty quickly. But what will happen if I don't fix this vulnerability? We'll see an example of this in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead here. In this demo environment, I'll submit my report, and then this will land in my HackerOne inbox. Okay, so now I want to show you what the triage flow might look like. So you can see I've got an iPhone app cross-site scripting vulnerability here. It's been submitted by the hacker Liz, and she submitted that to my bug bounty program. Now, I'm going to pause there because, as I said earlier, the HackerOne global triage team will be supporting every single vulnerability report submitted to your program. So let me walk you through that just now. In front of you, you can see the report operational model. Now, in our demo flow, what you saw there, Liz, the hacker, has submitted a vulnerability report, and this is where HackerOne Triage steps in. On your behalf, we will acknowledge the vulnerability report, thank the hacker for their work. Next, we want to review the vulnerability. We want to make sure that it's actually reporting on an asset that's in scope. We want to make sure we've never seen this vulnerability report before, i.e. mark it as a duplicate. And we want to make sure there's enough context in this vulnerability report so that I may reproduce the vulnerability. Now, reproducing vulnerabilities, as I'm sure a lot of you in this call know, takes a lot of time. So having the HackerOne Triage team do that on your behalf, our customers find saves them an enormous amount of time overall throughout the year. As well as making sure that it's reproducible, we want to make sure that we actually agree with the validity of the report and the severity. So this can be quite a contentious point. What if a hacker has submitted a vulnerability that, based on the objective reality of that vulnerability, is not quite as impactful as initially suggested? In that instance, the HackerOne Triager could mark down the severity of the report and say, thank you very much, this is indeed a valid report, but it's maybe not quite as severe as originally reported based on these factors. And it could be anything. If we take the confidentiality, integrity, availability triad, for example, let's say the availability wasn't actually impacted in the way that was originally suggested. Therefore, I'll mark that severity down from a high to a medium, and I'm happy with this report. I then pass that over to your organization. So HackerOne, as you can see, is going through a lot of the heavy lifting. We want to make your life as easy as possible when it comes to working with validated and ready to use vulnerability reports. Now, this is the point at which your team can confirm the report and ultimately pay out the bug bounty reward. So I think in the Q&A, we may have some questions on this. I'm going to pause it there for now and continue on with the demo. But please, if you do have any questions with regards to the triage support, let me know in the comments and I'll jump onto that during the Q&A. So what's next? What does a successful year-round program look like? Now, this is where I want to jump on to a real-world bug bounty program. So OKG, also known as OKX, is the world's third largest cryptocurrency exchange. They've been a customer of mine for over a year. They're a wonderful advocate of the crowdsourced security approach. And you can see here, they launched their program in March 2023, but it's already public. So for OKG, it was very important important to them to show to the global community. They were such an advocate of transparency that it was a key mission for them to have a public program to encourage anyone globally to submit a vulnerability. Now, what you can see here are real-world statistics. This is the real response efficiency rating of OKG. You can see the average time from triage to bounty is 3 days. So they're way above the global average of about 7 to 8 business days. They're doing really, really well. They're meeting 95% of the reporting standard, which is a super statistic to have. Now, don't be alarmed by some of the numbers you see in front of you. OKG do offer up to a $1 million bounty for what they classify as a subset of a critical vulnerability. They've actually classified an extreme vulnerability. Now, this $50 to $5,000 range is above average, but the $1 million is certainly this eye-catching rewards payout for a bounty. And unsurprising, what's happened here, loads and loads of hackers are wanting to do some work for OKG. They want to test their assets. They want to provide value to this organization. And so they're working super hard to submit vulnerability reports. You can see since only March of last year, OKG have resolved 119 vulnerabilities on their program, which I think is a wonderful statistic that supports this year-round program that we advocate at HackerOne. Let's dive into that number a little bit more. In the program statistics, in the last 90 days, they've received 156 vulnerability reports. Now, if you're seeing that number and go, oh my goodness, that's way too much, don't be alarmed. Bear in mind, this is a public program for a global entity. They have chosen to go into the public program probably earlier than most organizations would do so. For a private program, we might expect in the range of something like 10 to 20 vulnerability reports per month. That's a much more normal vulnerability submission rate for a private program. In this as well, you can see OKG have very clearly listed out their scope. Like I said with the HackerPowered security report, one of the most important things to hackers is openness and variety of scope. And so you can see they're using that wildcard I mentioned earlier for any subservice under the okx.com high-level domain. There are a large number of different types of assets here, which again is going to attract lots and lots of talent from the hacking community. Now, lastly, I just wanted to show you what a real-world policy page looks like. So how do real-world programs work? Well, we talked about exclusions. We talked about the rules of engagement that we list. This is what you see in front of you is not too dissimilar from the template we showed earlier with HackerOne. We recommend templates to all programs, and what tends to happen is our customers will slightly tweak them and tailor them based on their own requirements. But as you can see here, the DOS, the DDoS style testing, that keywording still being included. We're being very clear that we only want testing on assets in scope of this organization. Now, this extreme vulnerability, I love it. This isn't a common approach, by the way, but certainly something that OKG is using to be creative and attract different quality of hackers. You can see they've got one very specific definition of what an extreme vulnerability is. This is something that's so important to their business, they're willing to pay out $1 million in bounty. Now, if I scroll to the bottom of their program, you'll see very clearly the out-of-scope web vulnerabilities. Now, they're saying, we appreciate your work, but we don't want to be told about absolutely everything. And if you'll notice again, there's some of the same wording we showed you in the template earlier. They don't want to be told about best practices in SSL, TLS. You can be rest assured they're already aware of that. So they're using their bug bounty to focus on high impact vulnerabilities and those novel and elusive vulnerabilities that the traditional methods don't catch. So I'm going to take a quick pause there. What we've covered, just as a recap, we looked at how to set up a bug bounty program. What is a policy page? How do we determine the scope of the program, both in terms of asset types and vulnerability types? We talked about rewards table, how to structure that. And I can come on to that in more detail in the questions. We do tend to get a lot of questions on how to build rewards tables. We also spoke about why do hackers want to choose programs? Well, they care about rewards, of course, but they also really care about response efficiency. And as well, they care about that variety of scope. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to go to the question section. I see we've got quite a lot of messages. And Morgan, do you want to get us started with any questions that we've been asked?
Yeah, I can. We have received a few questions. One of them is about the scope tab. So is there a recommendation for filling out the details of the in-scope assets?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do when we set up your program, you'll be assigned a dedicated implementation manager. An implementation manager will say, which are your most important assets? Which are the assets that have been tested? We'll fill out that scope together. And what is really important as well, if you remember, if we go back to the demo, you saw there the cap in severity. So that cap in severity will essentially dictate how much bounty reward can be paid out on that individual asset. So we will sit down and we'll complete that scope together in partnership.
Awesome. Another question we got is, how can you prevent duplicate vulnerability findings?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a totally valid question because it does happen. So if you think back to that report operational model, what will happen in the real world, hackers will be racing to find vulnerabilities. There's essentially a race condition on who finds the vulnerability first. They'll get paid first. Okay. We will never advocate that you pay more than once for one unique vulnerability. So in the report operational model, in that second step, the HackerOne triage team will mark duplicates on your behalf. To give you a little bit more detail there, the HackerOne triage team, you'll be assigned a cluster of analysts who have access to your program. Now, bear in mind, we're maintaining the principle of least privilege, so we won't give access to any more than is required from our side as well. But each of those individuals has the ability to mark a report as a duplicate. Now, from the hacker's perspective, they will be slightly disappointed, but it does happen. It is part of the process. It's part of this domain. Duplicates happen. Now, if for some reason HackerOne didn't mark that, or we weren't aware that it was a duplicate, your team will also have the ability to mark duplicates and inform the hacker.
Another question that came up during the report operational model is on retesting and the process for retesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So all vulnerability submissions, you have the ability to request a retest. So you can see that here further along in the process. Has this bug been fixed? I want to request that retest to make sure that it is actually resolved. So in every single vulnerability submission ticket, you will see there is an option to select request retest. That will then ping the original hacker who will perform a retest on your behalf.
Awesome. And then we do have some questions around what is a realistic budget to set when setting up that bounty table?
Yeah, that's a great question. And listen, I love OKX because they just said, if you can crack our blockchain, you can break our wallet, that means the world to us will pay $1 million. Most people are not in that position. The starting bug bounty pools. So what we'll do, we'll sit with you, we'll work out, number one, how many assets do you have in scope for your program? Number two, what level of testing has already occurred on those assets? Now, bear in mind, I said very near the start of the call, we wouldn't advocate you including any assets in a bug bounty program that haven't at least already gone through pen testing at some point in time. So if you were to say to us, listen, I just want to get going with a bug bounty program, I've done a small degree of testing, that will actually influence the reward table that we recommend. Now, the bounty pool is the total spend that you will cap across a given year program. Those pools start at $25,000 and they go up in increments. So $25,000 would be the maximum you would spend on bounty rewards across a 12-month period. We will again advise you based on, there's a few different characteristics that we also care about. What is the industry vertical that you're in? What are the types of assets in scope? Now, what are the most important things actually when it comes to building a reward table? Do I have niche assets in scope? So the majority of assets on HackerOne globally will come under one of three asset types: web applications, APIs, and external networks. If I start getting into mobile applications, if I start getting into blockchain technology, IoT devices, they are more niche. And so it would require that we put more bounty rewards behind those assets. When you put more bounty rewards behind assets, naturally that would probably dictate a higher bounty pool. Again, if you've got any further questions, I'm sure we'll sending follow-ups after the session, or we can do deep dives. It's the job of a solution engineer. We have solution engineers and architects at HackerOne that will sit down with your team and work out something that makes sense. Number one, for your budget, right? We need to make sure that we're using your budget well, but we're also trying to optimize your program to make sure that we attract good talent from the community.
Another request that kind of came up, Chris, and you can let us know if you're able to show it, would be to see some of the real-time reporting or the dashboards in the platform.
Yeah, I can do you one better actually, Morgan. What I want to do is show people on the call. I would absolutely love it if you did anything after this webinar. Go on hackerone.com/hacktivity, and what you're going to see are the publicly disclosed vulnerabilities that our customers have allowed to be disclosed online. Now, hackerone.com/hacktivity is a list of real-world vulnerabilities that are being submitted. So what on earth is going on here? Let's find something juicy. Okay, on HackerOne.com, the ability to identify actual private from sandbox program using a link. To me, just from a quick look, this looks like, okay, improper access control. What is happening here? Well, actually, in the real world, on February the 20th, a hacker has submitted a vulnerability report to HackerOne. You can just see from a glance here, it looks like a very well-written report. We've got screenshots attached as evidence. We've got a nice walkthrough of what's happening. Now, hackers, when they found something valid, they want to be able to show, this is the work I can produce. Every single hacker on HackerOne has a public profile that can show the reputational score they've accrued through working with us in our ecosystem. And when they're able to showcase vulnerability reports, it says to the global community, wow, isn't this hacker accomplished? And it allows them also to be invited to lucrative programs within HackerOne.com. So if you were to go on this, I'm going to pop this in the chat for anyone who wants to actually look at this live with me. There's loads of details here. You can actually see in real life a report that's been triaged by HackerOne, by the customer, and also we're communicating with this hacker because they requested this be disclosed, and it's been allowed to be disclosed following the successful remediation of this vulnerability. So yes, there is an absolute treasure trove, Morgan, of vulnerabilities on hackerone.com/hacktivity. There is business level vulnerabilities. There is low level vulnerabilities. There are vulnerabilities on IoT devices that I've never even heard of. Check it out. This gives you a really nice idea of the variety of different vulnerabilities that we can find through Bug Bounty.
Awesome. Thanks for walking us through that. That is so interesting.
No problem.
And then another question kind of just on best practices. Do you suggest customers provide credentials for applications from day one, or let hackers try brute force in other auth-related test cases and then provide the credentials?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So what a lot of organizations will do will start with just pure black box testing. Let's genuinely replicate hacking. Let's replicate hacking. I don't want to give you any extra level of access that a hacker would have, and then let's test my assets from that perspective. When you are comfortable as an organization, you can go through that gray box testing. You can provide credentials for any assets you want to in a program. And what you can see in front of you here in this demo environment, I have listed credential pairs. This is user password pairs, where the individual can claim tokens that will give them access to that individual asset. It's not for everyone, Morgan. Some organizations, they want to treat bug bounty purely black box. For private programs who do have a small dedicated group of hackers, they can give access at a controlled manner with credentials if they're comfortable to do so. Now, I cannot stress it enough. You do not have to provide, credentials on your programs, but if you're comfortable to do so, you can absolutely facilitate that through the platform.
That's great. And then what if you receive a high vulnerability report that is not listed in the out of scope vulnerabilities? What would kind of happen in that scenario?
So, excuse me, if I understand the question correctly, a high vulnerability, so it's high as in severity, but it's not included on an asset in scope.
Correct.
So, generally speaking, we will use the asset scope list as an exhaustive list, a complete list. A lot of real world programs will have a catch-all to say that if any asset not listed here explicitly by default is ineligible for bounty. However, some organizations will say on a case-by-case basis, if you submit a vulnerability on an asset that is not in scope, and that that can happen for very legitimate reasons, Morgan. What if it's a shadow IT? What if it's an asset I didn't even know was under the remit of my security team? Then I certainly want to be made aware of it. So to our hackers, we would say, if you think that the program, even based on their wording, they will find that interesting, certainly do submit it. But if it's laid out in black and white that it will not be eligible for a bounty, then our hackers wouldn't expect a bounty reward. What can actually happen there if a vulnerability is submitted in an asset that's not explicitly listed as in scope? The program team may then choose to add that asset into their scope going forward. Now, it will be on the discretion of the customer's security team whether or not they want to pay out that vulnerability.
That's great. And then could you explain how mediation requests work?
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever we have a process, and by the way, statistically speaking, it's a very, very small number of vulnerability reports. But let's say there's a vulnerability report that's submitted that either it could be the hacker who submitted the vulnerability or the customer who's received the vulnerability. They don't agree with the process that's taken place with regards to triage. Morgan, what will often happen in that mediation case is someone has said, actually, I believe this is a more severe vulnerability than you've labeled, or I believe this is in scope. You can, you can escalate any vulnerability report to go through the mediation team. Now, HackerOne, as well as having a global support network with triage analysts, we will have a separate mediation specialist team. They will cast over their professional opinion on that individual vulnerability report. They will weigh up the objective merit of the vulnerability to say, based on all of the evidence I can see here, based on my own analysis, do I agree with whichever party has escalated that vulnerability report? And then we provide that mediation service. Now, statistically speaking, it's a fraction of a percent of all vulnerability reports, Morgan, but you're absolutely right. It is an important service that we offer nonetheless.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. This has been really beneficial and informative. I think another kind of question we're getting is around just how do hackers join our community and some of the ways they can get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I love speaking to hackers. I speak to hackers every single day. You can go on HackerOne.com, sign up as a hacker. You'll see a sign up process there. One thing I recommend doing is go through Hacker 101. So that's some basic training whereby you can practice your skills. We offer capture the flags or CTFs. You can hone some of your testing skills. Also, as well, there's some great organizations out there like Try Hack Me and Hack the Box. If you're not already aware, you can go and test your skills. You can try and break into some boxes. That'll help you build up the skill set to actually find real world vulnerabilities. Then come on to HackerOne and hopefully get paid. But yes, in answer to your question, just go onto hackerone.com. You'll see a sign up flow there if you want to become a hacker.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. This has been so great running through the platform, seeing the capabilities of HackerOne Bounty, hearing more about how our hackers are getting involved. Hopefully, we've answered all the questions. We will be sharing this recording after the call with all attendees and registration. So expect to see that in your inbox shortly. And thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, everyone, for joining. I hope you enjoyed that and I hope that was useful. Have a great day. Take care.
Bye-bye.